any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. This episode features a conversation between Matt and 3 of the 4 authors of the Let's Go series for young learners of English, Ritsuko Nakata, Frazier Tsai, and Barbara Hoskins Sakamoto, at the TESOL convention that took place in Seattle earlier this year. Along with Carolyn Graham, the group continued to work on the popular Let's Go series, now in its 4th edition with Oxford University Press. Matt asked the 3 authors about the background and development of Let's Go and about the influence that the series has had. Matt was supported by his daughter in asking questions. Stay tuned to the end to hear a special question from her.
Okay, so I thought it would be nice if we could start maybe by the 3 of you introducing yourselves very briefly.
Okay.
Would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I'm Ritsuko Nakata. I was born and raised and educated in the United States, and I came to Japan and got married, so that's the story of my life now. But as I had my own children, I started teaching English, and I did major in Oriental languages and linguistics while I was in the States, and went to grad school in New York. But I wasn't really ready to teach English because I was sent to Japan by an American company to work in their office and start a new company. But as things turned out, once they realize just, speak English, and when you have children, they all want to have you teach them English, and that's how I got started teaching English.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
I'm Frazier Tsai, also from the U.S. I was very interested in speech pathology and speech communication when I went to college, and my undergraduate degree is in speech and communication with a focus on speech pathology and stuttering. But at the end of my time in undergrad school, I really began to develop an interest in learning first language versus learning second language, with the similarities and the differences. However, I wasn't ready to go on to graduate school at that point in time, and I went and worked in banking and business for about 7 years. But during that time frame was when we had an influx of refugees from Laos and Cambodia and from Europe. So I began volunteering through an international institute to teach English to these refugees, and that really sparked my interest in going back to graduate school and to get a degree in linguistics and to work with people that want to learn English. And I taught all ages while I was in graduate school, and then I met my husband in graduate school and married him and moved to Taiwan. And that's where I really got going in teaching English.
Great. Thanks.
And I'm also from the U.S., California, Barbara Hoskins Sakamoto. And I actually went through university to get my teaching certificate to teach English in a high school. Then got my MA in TESOL and came over to Japan after my MA. And thought I would work for 2 years in Japan, pay off my student loans, and move back to the U.S. And that was in 1985. And I never really made it back to the U.S. for more than about 7 years at a time.
Okay, great. And then so the reason I'm speaking to the 3 of you together is that you are the 3 creators of the Let's Go series of books. So maybe you can just, for any of our listeners who are not familiar with it, explain what is Let's Go.
Well, Let's Go is a primary English course for children. I think it was the among the first ones that actually were for foreign language teaching, because when we got started here, most of the language books were ESL, that were for children learning English in an English language school. I mean, English-speaking country, I'm sorry. And so what we did was to find something that would be good for children here. And as I was teaching children, I found that although I did do some ESL in school, in graduate school, it didn't work here. And
Here being Japan.
In Japan, yeah. Because of the once a week lessons and no other exposure to English once they got out of the classroom. So when Oxford approached me to write a series for the children, I had already written several courses for the Juku, the cram schools, or the English language school franchises. And I got a lot of experience there in teaching and training teachers. And I knew what was missing, what we needed, and we really needed to address the problems of children here in Japan, where they need to be able to not just say one-word answers, but to communicate. And that means communicating in full sentences and being able to ask questions so that they can initiate a conversation and also give their own opinions.
I think the time area that Ritsuko is talking about was actually like 1990.
Okay.
And it was an ideal time for starting this kind of a course because there was a great need for it over in Asia.
It kind of matches with the growth of English language education for children being a market that justified its own series of course books. And even though Ritsuko talks about Japan, the books are actually used in 160-something countries now.
And that was one of the reasons I was brought in on the project. I was living in Taiwan and teaching in Taiwan, and they knew they wanted to market this in the Asian area. Japan, Taiwan, and Korea were the first three main markets. And so I joined Ritsuko in this process, and we really, really were focusing on teaching the children how to ask and answer questions, so it gave them the power to find out information they wanted.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember when I first started teaching in Japan after grad school, all the course books that I had available to me for kids had me asking the questions and the students answering.
One-word answers.
Right. There was never
Short answer.
There was never any idea that the kids would actually talk to each other.
Okay.
Or that they would ask me questions. Right. That was
Nobody expected that.
Nobody expected that. And so I think that there was a lot of innovation in Let's Go that is, I mean, it's so standard now that nobody thinks of it as being innovative because Let's Go is the first book that had the expectation that students would talk to each other, that they could ask the questions. It was the first book to include TPR as motion activity with speaking with the verbs. And
There's another name.
please.
And this is called the MAT method, which I had created because children weren't able to remember anything. And of course, TPR had the actions, but they didn't have the kids speaking. But we spoke at the same time so that they learned how to use full sentences as they were doing the actions, like not just throw or pick or run, but throw a ball or ride a bicycle in phrases and everything. And then they put it into sentences. I can ride a bicycle and things like that, and then ask each other. So with the actions and the speech coming together, this created a very, very natural situation for the kids to be able to use the language and move at the same time, and keep their energy up.
And in addition to that, we were using various activities and games that were very intentional. They all had educational purposes, and they were designed so that the children were talking to each other, and they were asking each other questions and answering questions. And again, Let's Go was a pioneer in doing that, because none of the other course books included that. If they were playing a game, it was just to play a game. We had a real purpose behind every single game that we included in Let's Go.
It was not to kill time.
No, it wasn't.
We had to practice the language
Exactly.
and have fun. Yeah.
Well, and also you
remember
can't,
it,
you wouldn't be able to imagine picking up a course book for kids now that didn't include chants.
Right.
And yet, Let's Go is the first book with Carolyn Graham writing jazz chants for the kids. So there's a lot there we were really lucky in our positioning, but we've been very fortunate to have been in a position where we've been able to have some influence in the way teachers expect to teach children now.
Right. So did all this come about because these are things that you were doing in your classrooms already, or was it you were looking at what was happening out there and trying to bring it in?
No, it's from
Our experience.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
We put all of our ideas together, and
And all three of us were classroom teachers, and all three of us are still teaching.
Yeah, great. And just maybe kind of the more nuts and bolts part of it. So what is Let's Go in terms of how many levels and how many...
well, it's actually a 7-level course, and each level includes student books and workbooks and cards and songs on CD and
Online practice. There's a lot of components. That's when you had 4 editions over 25 years.
Yeah.
You get lots of toys.
Yeah, okay, great. And could you maybe talk a little bit now about the process that you have, the three of you working together?
Well, Karen and I started off, and Karen was in Taiwan at the time. I was in Japan. And at the time, 1990s, we didn't have the technology that we do now. So we were actually typing things out and mailing them to New York and to each other. So between our drafts, we had a couple of weeks to start doing something else, and then we get the feedback. And then they said, why don't you get a fax machine? And we said, what's a fax
machine? And they had long rolls of paper.
Yeah,
It wasn't individual
Oh,
sheets. You had to cut up each page.
And you have to keep them, so that they won't roll up or fade as if you put them in the wrong place, under the sun or something like that. And then after that, it was easier though, but we had to reply immediately. But before we had a week or so, or 2 weeks in between. And then they said, why don't you get a computer? A computer? Yes.
Yeah, I think all of us got our first computers
Through this
Let's Go. Yeah.
work on Let's Go,
And then they
yes.
said, be sure to get an email. And what's an email? And that really started going every day, every single day. So, yeah.
And in addition, we did have times where we were having calls on the phone. Well, I was in Chicago, and Ritsuko was in Tokyo. After I moved from Taiwan, I moved to Chicago, and it was 17 hours time difference. So I would be up late at night, she'd be up early in the morning, or vice versa. And then as the three of us were working together, Barbara, at that point you were in California. I was in Chicago, and Ritsuko was in Tokyo. So we really had to do a lot of figuring out how to find the right time to communicate with
so
each
there was
other.
about 6 months working on computer and sending drafts, and then getting together physically once every 6 months or so.
Right.
Either in New York or Chicago or California. And I still remember I got the very first Dell I got. It had a 40 gigabyte hard drive. And I thought, how would I ever fill that?
It doesn't take very long.
No, but who would ever need more than 40 gigabytes for anything? And so moving from that, when there was also galleys things were typeset. Right? So you'd get galleys on A3 paper with the typesetting with just the text, because the pictures weren't added till the very end. And I think that starting with the third edition, it's all digital. Right. So there's no galleys and nothing is sent back
the final
at all.
proofs also. And I don't even know how long the paper was, but it was huge, and that would be mailed to us, and it would be a complete book, not bound yet. We were still looking and proofreading it.
Like a map.
It was like a huge thing, about this thick.
And for the third and fourth edition, pretty much, I mean, we ended up moving from those original fax machines to Google Docs and Skype. It's kind of, it's hard to believe.
I know. We've watched how technology changed through writing Let's Go.
We watched it, but
we were part of it.
Grabbing onto it.
It's not, how well we know it. Still, but,
And how do you work in terms of, do you divide the different units of the book amongst you, or do you all work on everything together?
Yeah,
we do a lot of brainstorming together. One person will put some ideas down, we send it off to each other, and then we respond to it. Or and Google Documents is where we do a lot of our work now.
Yeah, but I mean, we've written together. Our writing team has lasted longer than a lot of my friends' marriages. And so, we've written together for well over 25 years now, right? And so it's easy enough to channel each other. And so whoever has the time to get a first draft done can do that, and then the other two we'll all work together on the draft together at that point. Because we pretty much can imagine what the other person would say.
It is a true collaboration. Unlike many other books, we work together as a threesome. Other books have different authors that work on separate parts. We work on everything together.
We were very lucky that way, that back when Let's Go was, when it was first being worked on, publishing was a slower industry. And so I can't imagine now being able to have all of us working on the same levels at the same time, where typically you'll have an author team for one level, and so then the editor takes care of the continuity. So there's a level of continuity that we can achieve because we all work on all the levels.
I think we make a really good balance because we all have different strengths, and we can cover for each other time-wise also. If somebody is busy, the other two can take over. And we get everything done.
We do.
It really helps to like each other.
We really, 25 years we've lived through children and marriages and all kinds of things. We're almost like a family in a sense.
I guess we are.
Get along better than some.
That's true.
I've got some family members that I get along better with my co-authors.
We've just chosen our family here, right?
And has the book changed a lot from the first edition to the latest edition?
The industry has changed. I mean, the market has changed.
And technology has changed. So we've had to update Let's Go to reflect the changes in society and technology.
Second edition, we were still teaching cassette and record player.
And in terms of like the principles that you have in mind when you make the book, have those changed much?
I don't think the principles have changed.
So it's how to enhance it more. Before we were sort of more and more very, very basic, but now we can start expanding because the industry itself is starting to get more interested in more. It's mature. Conversational things that kids can do. But also we have started promoting more reading and writing for the very first. And I think we were among the first to do that also. And because the pendulum, when we started, the pendulum had gone from teaching grammatical English to conversation, 180 degrees. And conversation meant games. And you don't learn through games. You have fun, but you don't really learn unless, you really know how to say it. But the teacher's always giving hints. So that was something that was really, really picked up on, and everybody wanted to play games. But then the teachers realized that kids they love the games, but when we want to study, they don't want to study. And so we had to, teach them how to get the kids to use the language as a game as they're learning, so that they will learn it and have fun at the same time. So then they needed, the other problem was that once children learned how to, so to speak English, they went into junior high school and they didn't know how to read and write. So that was a big problem there, that the kids thought they knew English, but when they got their grades back, because they were written tests, it wasn't good. So, but we had started having them read and write from the very beginning. So this is also another trend that's starting.
Yeah, we just kind of changed the point at which
I guess
we started introducing reading and writing, when we had them tracing letters and words from the beginning, and gradually seeing text. It was always in front of them. Now at lower levels, we're actually having them work on the sounds and the phonics, and actually learning the sight words and combining them with picture cards so that they can read a sentence.
And that's one of the advantages of having all of us on all the levels, is that we can really control, especially after 4 editions, right? We can really control the syllabus. And so the languages are recycled in such a way that when children start learning, for example, the short A sounds, and the words that they're learning first to help them sound out the short A words are actually words that they learned orally at a lower level. And so typically when phonics books are put out in, for example, in Japan, they are often brought in wholesale from the U.S. or from the U.K., and so students have to go through an extra step, right? They have to learn the meaning of the word, plus learn the sound symbol connection. Where if they already, so we can use what's really great about phonics as it's taught for native English speaking children, but within a very controlled framework where the language world is very small, but they're able to follow the same process that children learning to read in their first language are able to follow.
Basically, any native English speaking child, when they begin their work in phonics and reading, they've got just a wonderful background in various
3,000 to 5,000 words.
Of words they've been learning for the first 5 to 6 years of their lives. Our students that are in an EFL environment don't have that. So
maybe 200 or 300.
So what we've done in working on Let's Go as they start their reading, we make sure, as Barbara was saying, that we start phonics with words they already know. And then we expand upon that.
And have you always had a lot of support from your publishers?
Oh yes, absolutely. We have been very lucky.
You mentioned that you have seen some changes, though, in the field of publishing.
A lot of it's technology.
Digital now. How many books and things are going into ebooks?
And I think that it's we're with a mainstream publisher, right? Oxford University Press, and we are very grateful to be with Oxford University Press because they have a very strong educational mission, right? So they're focused on not just book sales, but improving education support for teachers and students. They are under the same pressures that all publishers are under now, with just so many independent publishers and competition and YouTube and the growth of regional publication, because it's also been a maturation of the profession, right? So now you've got smaller publishers in Korea, for example, or in Indonesia, for example, and they're coming out with books for their market, and they're wonderful books, but it has changed the way that all publishers have to address their business model. I think OUP has gotten a lot leaner, but in the long run, the changes are probably going to prove to be good
beneficial.
ones.
Truly.
But a lot, the growing pains are a challenge. I mean, obviously, writers starting out in materials now are much more likely to be working for fees or working for freelance. So just the changing face of education. I mean, there's fewer children studying, and I mean, just the changes in society impact all of us.
And we've witnessed that through these 25 years, for sure.
Yeah.
And do you have any advice for maybe for somebody who's thinking of writing a book, but maybe also just in terms of materials development in general?
I think, having experience and knowing the field that they're going to write about and knowing the students that they're going to write for is very, very important.
Right.
Yes.
Lots of times you have people who think they know, but they don't have the real experience and practical knowledge of how to. And I think it's really important to have that knowledge in order to fit the needs of the group that you're writing for.
That's one of the things that really has made Let's Go a good, solid course series, because the three of us had a lot of experience in the classroom that we brought together when we were brainstorming and writing Let's Go. And we knew what we had gone through. We knew what the challenges were. We knew what we needed in the classroom and didn't have. We knew what worked. We knew the pitfalls of the materials that were being used back in the 90s that were ESL materials that were written for an English language speaking environment, but they were now being used in an EFL environment. And so the three of us understood that there were things we needed to include in Let's Go that would provide the students with the language knowledge and background they needed to succeed in learning English in a foreign language environment.
But obviously, I mean, I mentioned before that our books are used in over 160 countries. So because of that, we're not going to be perfectly matching the needs in any one particular classroom, right? Because the needs of a teacher in Saudi Arabia are very different from the needs of a teacher in Indonesia or in China. And so teachers always have to create their own materials to supplement. Either you're going to supplement your course book or you're going to supplement your own materials. And so I think the principles stay the same. Like if the teachers are writing for their own classrooms, then they perfectly know the needs of their students. And they can write materials that suit those needs better than we can. And if they're going to be standing there, they don't have to be as clear in the instructions. But once they start going beyond their classroom, then they need to make sure that the material is transparent so that any teacher can pick it up. And one of the things that we hear back from teachers is that, with Let's Go, they can pick it up and they flip through the book and they know exactly what to do. Because obviously we're not standing there telling them that, this is how you do this activity. And I think that if teachers start out writing for their own classrooms or their own schools or their own professional organizations, then they get a better feel for how to explain things for a broader audience. And I would say to teachers who want to start out in materials writing, one of the best ways that I've heard recently is to actually get to know their ELT reps, like the publisher reps, because these days the way things are written are largely in small chunks. Like they'll take different chunks of material and put them together to create either a book or a project or an online program. And when they're looking for writers, they'll use people that they're familiar with. And so if you're using a book and you really like it, let the publisher rep know. If you're using a book and you don't like it, let them know. And tell them why. And if you get a survey in the email, a lot of times the publisher will send surveys asking for input. Fill those things out.
And return it.
Because then they have your email address and they can see, oh, wow.
And they do stay in touch.
They do.
With those that complete the surveys. So
right. And so it's a great way in now. I mean, if you're hoping to find royalty work, look at a regional publisher or self-publish. And luckily for teachers, there's lots of options now.
Right.
Right. That's the last question for me. I have this, which is my 6-year-old. This is my 6-year-old daughter's
Picture dictionary.
Yeah. So for the listener who can't see, this is the monolingual Let's Go picture dictionary. Well used, as you can see.
Wow.
My daughter is not an English language learner. She's grown up bilingual with English and Japanese. But I bought this for her a few years ago for her own writing practice.
Right.
And she's used it very well. And I'll ask you to sign it.
Oh my God!
Oh,
for
sure.
her,
I'd be
she'll be very excited.
to.
But actually, the last question comes from my daughter.
Okay.
Oh, she's adorable.
So hopefully,
What's her name?
Her name? She'll tell you.
Okay.
I think she tells you.
My name is Ritsuko, and my question is how do you choose the words for the book?
How did you choose the words for the book?
Oh, I see.
Kiko, what we did was we thought about the words that would be the kind of words children would like to know, the words that you would use when you were playing, the words you'd use at home when you're talking about your house and your bedroom and talking to mom and dad and to your brothers and sisters. And we were very careful to try to select words that you would find that you would use if you were speaking English.
So that you can use the words that you learn and be able to communicate with your friends with it.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it very much.
She is absolutely adorable.
I'll leave that in. Okay, so once again, thanks.
Thank you,
Really
Matthew.
appreciate your time, and it was great talking to you.
Thank you very much for listening today, and we'd also like to say a big thank you to the 3 authors for taking part in the interview. Don't forget, if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can send us an email at TEFLology@gmail.com, follow us on Twitter @TEFLology, like us on Facebook, and listen back to previous episodes at TEFLology-podcast.com. We'll be back again in 2 weeks. Goodbye.